Welcome to Beyond Billable. This podcast is an exploration of the impact of artificial intelligence on companies that rely on the billable hour. So far, artificial intelligence has caused efficiencies which have mostly been passed on to clients without monetization. But as AI progresses, I foresee it having a way bigger impact than efficiencies alone. There will be winners, there will be losers. And it is my goal to share these changes with you before they happen so that you will stay ahead. In this episode, I speak with Dullaert, legal professional, legal philosopher, columnist, and author of 10 books and one of the earliest voices on innovation in the Dutch legal sector. Long before AI became a daily topic, she was already asking uncomfortable questions about structure, incentives, and mindset. We talk about why lawyers often understand trends perfectly well, but still fail to act, how trust and interpretation are becoming scarcer than information, and why cutting junior lawyers may create a serious long-term problem for the profession. This conversation was recorded in Dutch and translated to English using AI clones of our voices. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Dullaert. Crystal, thank you for your hospitality.
Welcome.
How nice that we can do this here at your home. You are an innovator in the legal sector and you have delivered a number of great innovations. My goal of this conversation is to share as much as possible of the knowledge of how you innovate with our listeners, because the world is changing very quickly at the moment. But before we do that, could you tell something about your background?
I am a lawyer and a legal philosopher. I only became a legal philosopher later. I studied philosophy and law at the same time, and I actually thought fairly quickly back then, philosophy is incredibly fun, but you do not earn anything with it. But I kept finding that program so enjoyable that I continued doing it alongside law the whole time, and then I specialized in legal philosophy. So I graduated as a lawyer, and I graduated as a philosopher.
And after that, you became a lawyer. And after that, you became in-house counsel.
Correct.
At the Port of Amsterdam
And at Vodafone.
And at Vodafone, indeed, you also talk about that in your book. After that, briefly to New York. There you also did all kinds of interesting things together with Harvard, United Nations. And then you came back again. Well, and then you also became somewhat known through all the columns you wrote. And now you are still active.
Yes, I just get involved in everything.
May I zoom in with you on the moment when you came back from New York and you started your innovation, and that was a staffing agency for lawyers, I understood.
And notaries.
And notaries.
Yes, well, we did indeed start with a staffing agency for lawyers. In the business plan, it said that we would also do that for notaries after a year. But we had quite a strong start with a publication in Het Financiële Dagblad, which is the Dutch equivalent of the Financial Times, and then 3 months later, we were called by a notary. What you do for lawyers, do you also do that for candidate notaries? And then we said, well, we will think about that for a moment. Well, we thought about it for a weekend, and then we also started for notaries. When I say a strong start, I mean a strong start in terms of clients. They actually immediately understood what we wanted to do. And yes, I would say they also called, but it was not a strong start in the sense of publication or support from the community in the legal world.
Because what went wrong there?
The strange thing was I had prepared that business plan very well. I had drawn up our contracts and general terms and conditions together with a former dean so that what we did fit within what was permitted for lawyers. And to my enormous surprise, our advertisements were refused in the Advocatenblad. It turned out that the bar had a veto right over everything that appeared in the Advocatenblad. Well, I absolutely did not know that, and I also did not understand why they prohibited our advertisements. But the crux was that we had, as a subtitle under our company, the words lawyers staffing agency, and the bar took issue with the term staffing agency. They said, you cannot place lawyers through a staffing construction. And then I said, well, we are not doing that either, but with that term, everyone immediately understands what we do. Well, there was a lot of hassle about that, and we had an advisory board, and on that advisory board there was a former national dean, and he said, Crystal, you have to remove that subtitle. Otherwise, you will keep having hassle. So, well, we eventually did that.
And then it still became a success.
Yes, my finest moment came half a year later because then we were called by the office of the bar. They themselves had shortages at the office and they asked us to assist them with that. So it already showed that by then it had become clear that what we did was in fact in accordance with the rules.
And what can we learn from that?
On the one hand, it was the case that we were immediately called by various people who saw this is what we need. That national dean who was on our advisory board also said, what you are going to do, there is a need for it. But at the same time, there is always a lot of resistance, and that is somewhat part of the legal world. It may also be a bit Dutch. You already said, I had just come from New York. Yes, if in New York you say, I am starting a new company, everyone thinks that is great. And here, if you start telling people you are going to do something new, everyone immediately lists all the obstacles you might run into. Of course you can run into obstacles, but so what? That is no reason not to start. So it is perhaps also a bit Dutch, but also in the attitude of lawyers. If you come with something new, is that even correct? Is that allowed? And why would that be necessary? But besides that, there are always people who are innovative, who dare, and those are also your very nicest first clients.
And you actually have to bring those in, and then after that it spreads like wildfire because you achieve the first success with them.
You really have to, yes, I would say the first sheep has to cross the dam, and that is a matter of people trusting you or seeing that the product you have is good. It starts, of course, I always held an intake interview with everyone we placed, so I had seen everyone. But it comes down to clients seeing that what you do is good. You simply need a first group of clients who trust you. And of course, that also comes from the fact that I already had an existing network.
You actually did not need that whole advertisement at all.
No, maybe not. No, I think that in the end, you benefit more from your network than from that advertisement. That advertisement supports name recognition to let people know that that is what you can deliver, but you benefit more from your network.
Yes, you have written many books. They are all here lined up. I have read one of them. Thank you for letting me do that. And that is Yoga in Your Gown. This book came out 15 years ago, and it is still fantastic to read. And in my view, that is because of the structure. You chose a structure where you first explain how you should deal with innovation, so how you should look at the world, and then you make the translation very nicely to what that practically means. And you did that with examples from 15 years ago, and that method still applies. So I encourage everyone to read this little book, because in 2 hours you finish it, and you have learned a lot. And the first thing I want to ask about is a kind of conceptual model. It is right at the beginning, and it says firm, and then a transactional environment, and then a contextual environment. Could you explain that?
Yes, it is. Look, what you say, this book is a bit older, but with every change, whether that is the arrival of AI or who knows what we will encounter in 5 years, with every change you have to look at, how do you respond to a change? First of all, as a firm, you have to deal with your direct environment. Who is your staff? I just mentioned the bar, but as the legal profession, you have to deal with the rules of the bar, the rules of conduct, the disciplinary rules. How is the staffing of your firm? Those are all influences in your direct environment, but besides that, you are in fact driven by what happens in society. I now say AI. The trends I mention in that book are different, but the point is that you are moved, or you are forced to move, by what happens around you. And the art is, and that comes partly from so-called future studies. In the Netherlands, you do not really see that as a field of study. Outside the Netherlands, you do. You take the data from your own environment and those societal trends and map them out. What are the developments I should take into account? And then, of course, you try to make a translation.
Yes, you mentioned 2 futurists in your book, and I broadened that a bit because I was, of course, very curious. By the way, I did find it very nice that what was mentioned there as the future has all come true. Largely, something like 80% has come true.
Yes.
You can just see it. So those futurists who spoke there, they were simply right. And that is the beauty, because we are talking about megatrends. It is really about macro developments, and the chance that that is correct is quite large. So you can basically look into the future if you listen to those kinds of people.
Yes, but I have to say, even I wrote this book and I listened poorly to myself. So listening and understanding is still something different from really doing something with it actively and actually making adjustments in yourself or in your organization. So I would say cognitively, things are quite easy to understand if you see that trend. But being an entrepreneur is the action of implementing things where you do not yet directly see the necessity.
Where does it go wrong?
People simply do not feel like changing. That is a very simple thing. Another thing is that I would say everyone is too busy with their daily stuff, with their daily hassles. So really pausing and thinking through, what does this mean and what could it bring me? Or yes, even more importantly, what could it bring my clients? People do not get around to that enough. And that is also difficult if there is actually no external necessity to change. So yes, everything seems to be going fine. You earn well, clients are happy. Why on earth would you change? But I do have to say, in every firm you do see a few people who do want that, but they often have more of that forward-looking perspective, yet they get less support from the majority of people who want business as usual.
Yes, at the end of the book, and we do not have to follow the order of the book, you talk about an R&D department.
Yes.
And you call it a department.
Yes.
But when I read it carefully, it was actually quite feasible for any firm of any size.
Dead simple.
Could you explain how that works?
What I think the problem is, and you see that with all kinds of introductions, certainly the classic legal profession and the notariate, is that in fact you have a board and beneath it a kind of partnership structure of partners who decide which direction the ship goes. In itself logical, but I think with today's changes you need much broader input from young people, real juniors, but also media level employees. You will have to involve them, but officially they have no voice in the strategy of a firm, to the extent that firms even have a multi-year plan and many do not. But in any case, the young people have no influence on the strategy, and I think that is a mistake. And I do understand that young people cannot sit on a firm's board, but you can organize it by, I say you can create an R&D club and it contains, say, 2 juniors, 2 associates, a staff department, preferably also 1 or 2 external people because they also bring different ideas, and let that group also advise. I know few firms that have that. I know that Van Bentham and Cullen did do that. They call it a sounding board group. That sounding board group can take initiative itself, or they can be asked about certain subjects. But I think certainly with the arrival of AI, you really have to mobilize the young people and involve them.
Yes. And if we then look at costs and the threshold to do something like that, it is really not that bad because you have them meet how often per year?
Well, I would say if you do little, you do it twice per year, but if you do it properly, you do it once per quarter. Yes, you let people, I do not know, spend 4 to 8 hours writing for it. That is an investment of zero. It has more to do with mindset than with money or time.
Yes. And then, because you see a lot of firms now that they have an AI committee, but that is actually far too narrow if I hear you correctly. And also your approach that you describe in the book is much broader. You talk about megatrends like meaning and about environmental impact and just many things that are far beyond AI. That is perhaps too focused. So it actually needs to be much broader.
It can be much broader. And yes, why I include those other elements, for example, meaning and corporate responsibility, is because the staff you attract, but also other personnel, your professionals, will pay more attention to that. For many starters, it is, of course, a complete jumble. All firms, how do you choose? They all look alike. I do know the differences in culture by now, but for someone who is starting, that is not visible. Everyone also comes with more or less the same stories, and then these kinds of elements, which seemingly have nothing to do with the profession, do in fact start to play a role. But the same applies to clients. They often also do not know, how do I choose among all those firms? And then value is attached to those kinds of side aspects. So you can say, I have to be a good lawyer and a good candidate notary, and the rest is nonsense. In itself, that is true, but in an abundance of supply, and it is there you help people make choices, and that applies both to your personnel and to your clients.
Yes, you also described a few things that I want to mention briefly that are still completely true today. And one is that you need skilled and kind lawyers, because those are the lawyers who have a future. That is still true, and it is increasingly the case that the human side of lawyers is starting to play an ever bigger role.
I think that is still very relevant, also with all the changes that are happening now, maybe even more so, because clients of firms are also becoming confused. What should I believe? What should I not believe? Am I not paying too much? Am I getting the right information? Am I perhaps paying for 20 hours of advice while everything has been done in an automated way? Nobody has spent 20 hours on that, so you start looking more at the things you can assess. And that is, what is my conversation partner like? Or can I share my concerns with them? People do not come only for purely legal reasons. People also have concerns about how things are going in their company, how it should go in their business, how it should go with their staff. Should they or should they not hire young people in this time? You want to be able to share those concerns with someone who listens to that and responds to it in a good way.
Yes, and then you should not only use your left brain, but also your right brain.
Precisely your right brain.
Your right brain, I understand. There is also a very nice URL. We'll put it in the show notes. I did it because then you get the result of whether you are more left or more right-brained. And I have the strange situation that, for me, both work a lot.
Well, that is not strange. That is beautiful. Many people have much more of one or much more of the other. But if I say you want a conversation with someone skilled and kind, then ideally you want someone to have both aspects.
Okay.
That person should, just like when you go to a good doctor or a good surgeon, be very good at operating, but you also want them to be able to listen to what your concern is about the operation. And it is the same when you come in to conduct legal proceedings. You can think, yes, I can have some autistic person in front of me as long as they do the procedure well. But it is, of course, nicer if someone can also do all of that well and explain it to you properly.
So it is not a crazy idea to have everyone fill in that test at your firm or legal department and see how much left and how much right do we actually have in-house. Because if I understand you correctly, there is a big chance that there is a lot of left and little right.
Yes, if you ask clients, they regularly complain that technically it may all be fine, but that a lot goes wrong in communication.
Yes. Legal departments, if they work at companies that may have an R&D department, that R&D department does completely different things. It is really focused on the product of that company and not on innovating the legal work.
Correct.
So legal departments should also just have an R&D department or not?
Yes, in fact, they should. Look, actually, the whole message of my book is, how do you organize creativity? Because if you want to act or respond or deal well with a very busy environment that changes a lot, then you need a creative mindset. That is why the yoga idea comes in. And you actually have to promote that within your department, both in a firm and in a legal department. Another method is, for example, lawyers have a strong tendency when something comes up to judge whether it is correct or not. That is a skill that is very useful if you have to assess something legally, but it is an extraordinarily unhelpful skill if you have to invent something new for the future, because then you get stuck at, is this true or is it not true? But you do not look further.
Yes.
And a method to break through that is, for example, well, let's brainstorm how we deal with development X. And if you brainstorm, you force yourself, for example, by saying, or you do it with a group of 5. Let's think of 10 things, and it is also anything goes. So you are not going to say, your idea is worthless, or we have already done that 3 times. It does not work. And lawyers are brilliant at that too. And you kill off all creativity. But if, for example, as a legal department, you say, well, once every 6 months we are going to brainstorm about something that comes our way, and we are going to do it according to that method, that forces us to be more creative.
Yes, the classic method where you first come up with the ideas together and then only after taking a break you look at which of those ideas are the ones that stick.
Only then do you start selecting. And lawyers are, I would almost say, too good at killing things or too good at finding loopholes. They have to do that in legal work. The difficult thing is that all the skills that make you a super good lawyer get in your way when you want to think creatively.
Yes, and that is why it seemed fun to me to practice that her in this interview. Because what you do in your book is you mention a number of those megatrends and then you translate what that means for society and then what that practically means for a firm. So what I did to make it a bit up to date is I asked ChatGPT, which thinkers are there who say good things about the future? Then I got a whole list of very smart people. Ray Dalio's also on it. Well, yes, he is smart, but I'm not a big fan of that man. But Peter Zeihan and Neil Ferguson and Nassim Nicholas Taleb, of course, of the Black Swan, whom you also mention, and then another whole list of people. And then I made the fun prompts. Suppose all those people combined their brains, what 5 megatrends would they come up with? We do not have time to discuss them all, but one seemed like a very good one to me. So I will read out what ChatGPT made for us. By the way, this is not me saying that this is the truth, that this really comes from them. This is, of course, fabricated, but I thought it was good. Scarcity shifts from information to meaning and trust. I will also read the explanation. Information is abundant and cheap. What becomes scarce is interpretation, context, judgment, and credibility. Who you trust becomes more important than what is technically true.
Yes, well, that is what I just touched on with you want to be able to have a good conversation about what your concerns are. This is a variant of that. Of course, with the push of a button, everything can be found. It is also quite tempting when it comes to legal matters to think, well, just like people almost no longer go to the doctor and think, I can find out what illness I have, but it still turns out at some point that that is only part of the truth. And you still want a kind of check, like when you go to the GP, I think I have this, but you still want to hear it from the doctor. And it is the same with your legal problems. I think I have this, but you also know there is so much disinformation, half information. Is this really correct? And then you need that sounding board who is the sieve for you and who says, yes, in itself, this is not untrue, but in your case, I would not use it. You need that sieve, even if it is only as confirmation that you are on the right track and that you have distilled the right information out of everything you come across. Because you also know with giving prompts, if you give the wrong prompt, you also get the wrong answer. So you need that experienced filtering conversation partner.
Yes, and so if we then, so this is the translation to the legal sector, and I recognize this, by the way, because also during trainings, I hear from participants during that training, yes, I get clients who already explain what the problem is. And yes, can you just say that it is correct and then write for 12 minutes because then we are done.
Nice and quick, ready.
So what does this mean then? What should a firm do to deal with that better? And it would also be nice to look at this from the legal department. What practical implication does this have for lawyers?
Yes, look, I would almost say firms tend to be somewhat lazy in innovations. And actually a driving force should in fact be the legal department or a general counsel of a firm, because that is the most important client of most firms. So that is actually, so to speak, more the one who is at the controls than a firm itself. But I have already seen good examples of that collaboration, but that requires a lot of precision. There too, a firm and a legal department have to trust each other. Legal departments are often afraid to start with all kinds of new developments because they think, are we really seeing this entirely right? And they, as it were, buy in the knowledge from firms to also cover their ass, to cover themselves with, well, I did do it all right, right? But what I like is when you truly collaborate as a legal department with a firm. And I found an example of that very nice. A while ago, Douwe Groneveld, he is now gone from ASML, but they had done, we are going to do an acquisition. We want to do as much as possible with AI. The other party in the acquisition also thinks that is fine, and Allen and Overy facilitated that they did it there at the firm, and they basically made all their knowledge or everything available to see how did this go. Well, I think that is a great example of collaboration. And Douwe also said afterwards, I actually find it surprising how good this is, but you do need the overview of an experienced person to see, is this correct or is it not correct? So yes, it does an enormous amount, but we have to check it. But the fact that you as parties, both the legal department and the legal profession, start collaborating in that, I think is a textbook example of how it should be. And I sat on the jury of the Gouden Zandlopers, which is an award for legal innovation, for a long time. And what I saw there as good examples of innovators were the firms that actively sit down with their clients, or in this case, the legal departments, and say, we also do not know entirely for sure how to do this. You do not either. But shall we try this together to see how we can organize our work more efficiently? And I saw really good examples of that at the Gouden Zandloper as well. These examples are fairly unique, but that is how it should be, I think.
You also talk about the Hollywood hotel model, or even the Bollywood model, because you explain very nicely that a legal assignment consists of all kinds of sub-assignments, and that it contains high-level thinking work, and that it contains bulk work. That project management is actually super important. And I know lawyers a bit, but they are not very good at project management. So I found that, and that was 15 years ago again, and now it is, of course, even more applicable than it was then.
Yes, what the Hollywood model basically says is just like when you create a film. There is, in fact, a producer who finances, and then the best sound engineer, the best lighting engineer, and you work, and the actors, and for the duration of the film you work together, and after that everyone goes home.
Completely flexible.
Yes, we helped a bit with that through those interim professionals. I know very few firms that work on that kind of project basis. They do exist because they have a certain very specific expertise, and every now and then that problem comes your way, and then it is also very big, and then you have to organize it. But indeed, it is not in the nature of many people to work in a project-based way. And yes, that also requires other skills. You have to have management skills, and that is a different skill than being a good lawyer. How do you organize it? How do you bring people in? Yes, how do you do that? But I do think that the classic model of, yes, everyone comes in and you train them. I will not say that that is bad, but it makes you less flexible. And that project model, if you can do that well, then that is useful. Another thing that firms were always bad at, for example, is giving fee quotes. So someone comes and says, what is this going to cost? There were simply no good models for that. Those have partly come, for example, through Clocktimizer, which mapped those kinds of things much better. But it was really a bit of finger in the air work. But that is something you have to master in order to do that project work.
You also talked about the CEO of let me see, Mark Chandler of Cisco. He said that 75% of the legal tasks he outsourced, and that was 75% of $125 million was fixed fee. So you see that tech companies demand it from there because if they are big enough, they can demand it because they have that leverage. But you also see it at ASML. They demand from their law firms that work for them that they use AI and that they
certainly
pass on the savings immediately, so to speak.
Look, that is an advanced legal department. They take the initiative, they go to a firm and they say, how are you going to do it? But I want you to do this, this, and this, and also make it transparent, and especially making it transparent. Yes, people also find that difficult sometimes, but fortunately there are enough firms that do that. And yes, I would say then you have the most fantastic clients. Because yes, why can ASML demand that? Yes, everyone dances to ASML's tune, but there are many more clients like that. And the nice thing is if you can collaborate in such an open way, and I think you also have to have the courage as a firm to say, we are going to do that, and it is transparent what we do, but know that we also do not yet know everything. Fine.
My big takeaway from this interview is that the Hollywood model is actually a requirement to be able to make that transition to more fixed prices. Because the moment you do not approach it in a project-based way, and you also do not analyze how much time, what cost, and look at, hey, what did we actually achieve here, and do that for a while, then you also cannot predict. So it is simply a requirement. Is there a gap in the market? Or maybe they already exist. Project management firms that are entirely for the legal sector.
Well, let me put it this way, firms are not organized as such. And then I am talking about the classic legal profession and the classic notariat. There are legal advisory firms or other legal advisors A while ago, there was also such a new firm started that says they do this more on this basis. It is not a law firm, but I actually do not know any law firm or notary's office. Yes, or the cheapest notary resembles it a bit, but that specifically profiles itself on this, there are very few. Look, generally, yes, there are also, for example, yes, there are more. For example, Lexens is also a firm that is commercially very well organized and in fact does have a kind of project manager director. But yes, sometimes you have to look very critically. Generally, at firms, it is really simply, there is this much coming in, these are our fixed costs, and we keep this much. But yes, the profit share of the partners is of course still an issue, which yes, everyone simply wants to maintain. So I would say everything is fine as long as the profit share remains.
Agreed. And if you want to move more toward a product organization, then you will also have to invest.
Yes.
And that is difficult.
Yes. Or you have to say, for this project, the profit shares are different, but we do it because we find it interesting. But then you do have to have that conversation with a lot of people every time. That is not very flexible.
But there is no gap in the market right now because there is no law firm that would outsource that externally.
I do not know them, but who knows? Maybe I missed something.
Yes, maybe it is coming. You also talk about the funnel model, that is the future. Has that also come true? And then it is about the distribution of employees in a firm.
Yes. Well, let me put it this way. Whether it has come true, I do not know, but I am honestly very curious what is going to happen in the coming years. Because in America, you already see the movement now that there is more unemployment among young people, more newly graduated people who have a harder time. I am very curious what is going to happen in the coming years in that respect. Because let me say, a number of big firms are really the trainers of very large groups of young lawyers who later end up somewhere else. But they are, in fact, the training machine. And I am very curious what is going to happen in the next 5 years, whether those kinds of firms will actually take on significantly fewer juniors. That I am curious about, and I have to say that I also find that quite a worrying development. Because it is said an AI system can already write better memos than a starting junior. So it is very tempting to think, right out with those juniors. But if you look at what Douwe Groneveld says, to assess everything AI does, you do need that experienced person who has already smashed their head against the wall 10 times. So that training demands a relatively large investment, which only pays off after 5 to 10 years, so to speak. And so it is tempting to cut at the bottom. But I find that a difficult thing also toward young people, because there will have to be someone who trains those people so that they eventually also reach that level.
Okay, so what you are basically explaining is that the market causes a problem. If everyone keeps thinking only about their own profit, because if everyone does this, if everyone does not take on juniors, then in 5 to 10 years, there will not enough lawyers with enough experience.
Correct. And actually, if I am a bit, yes, not petty, but actually that problem is already a bit like that now, because a lot of big firms train enormous numbers of people. Now you could say they keep the best for themselves, but there is also enormous turnover. It is becoming more expensive to train that junior. And with that turnover, yes, let's say all the mid-sized firms or all the boutique firms are standing there with open doors waiting until those juniors come walking in. And I would almost say, before, it was sometimes said the less good ones drop off and they can go to those other firms. But that is actually no longer the case. There are also a lot of people who simply leave themselves after so many years. And yes, I have sometimes thought with those boutique firms, where is your responsibility in training young people? And it could well be that in the coming years they will dare to take less risk in training others. So I think what happens this year and next year is not that decisive yet. But I do seriously wonder what it will be like in 4 or 5 years.
I share that concern with you, but at the same time, I have 1,000 ideas for how you can let young people wrestle with that legal content in a different way.
Absolutely, that is also true. Certainly, yes, you can have them build models.
You can have them build models. You can have them litigate against another AI and have them analyze what they did not do well. Have point scoring systems. You can make a whole game out of it. It does not generate money, but they do learn.
Certainly, certainly. And yes, that is certainly true. That is correct. But I also mean that percentage of people who are also simply needed in 5 to 10 years, or that there are enough of them then. But I think a lot of starters already begin in a totally different way. I do know the absurd thing was I myself once learned in the legal profession that I had to work with a dictation device. But I heard not that long ago that people came from university fully able to do everything themselves and then still had to be taught to dictate first. That is from longer ago, but you teach them a skill off in order to teach something old-fashioned. And what you just said, a generation of people is graduating. You should especially not saddle them with the old way of working. You should let them do it differently immediately.
They should work on that EQ immediately, and the rest they should be able to assess it. And that is, of course, a skill that you only get when you have enough experience.
And that's the tricky part with AI.
Yes, exactly. But what I am concerned about is this middle segment. I can well imagine that a lot of people in the middle segment will be laid off in the coming period.
Certainly, that is going to happen. That is going to happen, yes.
I am also still wondering, lastly, in 2007, you had the Legal Services Act in the UK, and in America, you also increasingly see private equity in that legal sector. How is that in the Netherlands?
Yes, officially that is still prohibited, that a law firm, let's say, partly consists of external capital, private equity, but that could also remain that way. There is a good chance that the bar will also hold on to that. But that does not stop developments. You will see that private equity will do things that look exactly like the legal profession, but better, cheaper, and so on.
And then they just do not call it a law firm.
No, then you call it something else. You also do not have to, you can also just be legal services, does not matter.
So the influence that we see in England and America, we already see it here, and we are only going to see it more.
Yes, I think that is also unstoppable. I would only hope, look, what private equity brings is money, and they invest. And I do think there is a problem in the classic legal world that they invest insufficiently in new developments. It happens bit by bit. They do not invest nothing, but not substantially, not very much. The discussion at many firms is, so to speak, how do we maintain the profit share of the partners, or do we increase it? While you should actually say, guys, we all need to give up a quarter and invest in our business and in new developments.
Yes, I think this is fantastic advice to end with. And they really have to make the move themselves. So if they do not do that, then they will let the cheese be taken right off their bread by the private equity firms and by the VCs that are funding all the startups.
Life goes on.
Yes, like Richard Susskind said, where we met each other.
He said, clients will show no loyalty.
Exactly.
In other words, a number of clients will want to keep having that conversation, what we were just talking about. But a large number will think, okay, if it is better somewhere else and I get what I am looking for, but in a different way, then I will go there.
And you cannot blame them. Are there any things you want to tell our audience in closing?
An 11th book of mine is coming.
How nice.
It will come out before the summer, but that is another line of work. It is about negotiation trainings that I give. And I thought, well, I will write about what I do there.
Oh, how nice.
But that is something new, so it will come out before the summer with Boom.
I will definitely read it. Thank you very much for the interview.
Thank you.
Hey, this is Pim again, and I have one question before you go. Would you like to receive an email from me each time the new episode drops? It includes a summary and highlights and some snippets from the conversation, and you would receive it on a bi-weekly basis. It's short and sweet, and you'll never miss an episode. If you want to do that, just go to pimbetist.com and you can sign right up. So just type that into your browser, pimbetist.com. Thank you again for tuning in, and see you next time.